Bourbon Women is not a drinking club. It is a movement.
I wish my grandmother could see this. I do. I am Miss Green's great-great-granddaughter.
I'm in the magical room. Eventually this will hold all the bourbon bottles that are currently in production in Kentucky.
Absolutely nothing more compelling than watching someone chew on camera, is there?
Oh, yes, they are.
Yes, they are.
Hello, everyone. Happy Monday.
Hey.
I'm Sarah Whelan.
And I'm Spencer Whelan.
And we are here with a Taste the Trail special edition of our live stream that we've been doing. We've spent the last couple of weeks going through the Texas Whiskey Trail, tasting a little something from every distillery as a way to kind of connect with all of you guys while we are sheltering in place and staying safe and all that kind of good stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And the big thing that we've been trying to do is to teach me how to properly nose and taste whiskey. So
I think you're doing a damn good job. Personally,
I've had some great helpers along the way.
Yep.
Listen to me.
Yeah.
You could tell I've been with kids all day long.
Yeah, exactly. Some good helpers.
That's right.
But we have 19 distilleries on the Texas Whiskey Trail, and you do the math. That's five shows a week. You got 20 shows if you do it over 4 weeks. So we have one extra show.
Yeah.
And we decided that we wanted to pay homage to the people who have brought the idea of whiskey tourism to the forefront. And they happen to be a lot of women, and
they're amazing.
And they're amazing women in whiskey. So we decided to do a whole show about it. And
that's right.
It is unbelievable the amount of people that are going to be on this thing tonight.
I know.
We're so excited to have them on. We're so excited to be sharing this with all of you. But it's an impressive lineup of folks.
Yes, it is. So I feel like we should stop talking about us and let them come on, because they're far more interesting.
Yeah, but first, just one last thing. We say this every time, but for those of you that are watching or watching for the first time, the reason we're doing this is because we're sheltering in place. But a lot of the distilleries in Texas have been working really, really hard to produce sanitizer for hand sanitizer, because the DSPs are allowed to do that now during the crisis. If you want to support us in our efforts, please go to TexasWhiskeyTrailStore.com, and you can buy a #StillStrongTX t-shirt. The proceeds from that will help us in our efforts to make sure that distilleries are getting the support that they need in this time, whether it's legislatively or otherwise. So please consider doing that if you are attending for the first time. But with that said, would you like to introduce our first guest?
Our first guest, I feel like she needs no introduction, but I'm still going to introduce her.
Yes.
Peggy Noe Stevens founded Bourbon Women, I think, a little over 10 years ago now. She has done so much in her career. It's kind of amazing. So I can't wait to bring her on and chat about that. But I had the great fortune of going to Symposium last year in Louisville, and it was so wonderful and opened up just a whole nother world for me in Kentucky.
Yes.
I just was like, I had no idea all this was here. This is so cool.
Well, let's talk about it.
So let's bring her on.
So Peggy, hey, it's good to see you.
Oh, well, hey, I didn't want y'all to interrupt me. I was nosing some big Texas whiskey.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You know, I'm an official member now.
That's right.
Of the trail. I'm pretty proud of that.
Well, you are official member of the Texas Whiskey Trail, but you actually founded the Kentucky Bourbon Trail.
That's right.
You know, actually, I founded it along with two other women who, believe it or not, at the time I was working at Woodford Reserve Distillery. It was back in the late 90s. And the visitor center director from Jim Beam and the visitor center director from Maker's Mark and I were friends. And we were all trying to figure out ways to cross market and bring visitors to our establishments. And we got together and we said, hey, maybe we should do a trail of some sort. And we brought it to the Kentucky Distillers Association, the whole idea. I think we had a total of 8 distilleries at that time.
Yep.
And the rest is history, as they say.
And a relatively quick history too. I mean, this is about the same time as the Texas whiskey industry got started. You were starting the Kentucky Bourbon Trail in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, around there.
It was 1999 actually is when the trail officially kind of took off with the brochure, and that was kind of a big deal because it's almost unimaginable. But in the 1990s, bourbon did not make the top 10 things. A list of things to do for tourists. Can you believe that? Just back in the 90s.
Look
at it.
That's amazing. And now it's probably one of the largest tourism activities in the state of Kentucky.
Absolutely. Right up there with the horses.
Right up there with the horses. Yep.
Which is amazing, which I can believe it, because that was very my experience when we would visit in the 90s was not paying attention. Granted, my family wasn't really drinking, but we had a whole lot of Rebecca Ruth bourbon balls.
Yes.
Oh, heck yeah.
We did not shy away from those suckers.
And we still have a whole lot of Rebecca Ruth.
Right. We make a stop every time we come for a visit.
I love it.
And every time her nanny comes down from Kentucky, she always brings a whole bunch of Rebecca Ruth boo-boos. You know, the mistake candies, and brings my dad, and he just goes through them like crazy. Ends up with a huge stomach ache, but it's amazing.
It's worth it.
Yeah, it is.
Every single.
That was really the bourbon. He just said it was bourbon candy.
Right.
Oh man, it's fantastic. So Peggy, tell us about how you got Bourbon Women started.
Oh gosh, I think Bourbon Women was probably in my heart. I've been in the industry for 30 years, and it's probably been there about 25 years for me. Because every time being a master bourbon taster that I would go out and speak to the public or conduct a tasting, and these were tastings literally around the world. There would always be predominantly a male, group, which is pretty traditional, and a few trickle of women. And I always noticed at the end of any seminar I did, the women would come up afterwards, and they were kind of gun shy about asking me questions, and so I always remembered that. And then when it came to marketing bourbon, the money was never there to market to women, because it was a priority to fix the target market, to men at the time. And so when I started my own company about 12 years ago, I just knew there were like-minded women. I knew that we were the other half of the population to target. And so we conducted focus groups across the state of Kentucky with women and said, what do you want? I mean, what would you be loyal to a group like this? Would you like the lifestyle feature of it? Do you love bourbon? What kind of bourbons? And from there, I took all that research, and believe it or not, I sat down with Bill Samuels from Maker's Mark, because Bill's a mentor of mine and always really great champion. And I sat and I knew he'd tell me the truth, and I showed him all of this, and I said, why aren't we marketing more, to the women that we know love bourbon? And he said, Peggy, this is unbelievable, and it's great. And he used the magic words. He said, we need to start a conversation. He didn't say, let's go market. He didn't say, let's go target. He said, let's start a conversation. And from that, Bourbon Women was born. And we launched our inaugural event at the Governor's Mansion here in Kentucky. We've now done over, I think 250 events across the U.S. We have a branch in Texas that we're so very proud of, and 10 other states along with that. And we have our annual symposium, which of course, Sarah, you attended and had a great time. And we met a ton of women from Texas that came down to Kentucky during that in August.
Well, speaking of that, there are a lot in the comments already. We got Marcia Iron Root.
Hi, Marcia.
Root.
I saw we're going to taste a little of your product, dear.
Oh, yes.
Yes, we are.
And we also have Samantha Olvera, who is first
Sam.
bourbon. Yeah, you know Sammy.
Yes, I do. I love it.
And Hope Parkerson of Garrison Brothers.
Yes, that little baby of hers. I adore it.
So
the best head of hair in history.
Best head of hair in history.
So we got a lot of bourbon women, Texas bourbon women in the comments already, and Hope actually brought bourbon women along with Sammy and their whole crew brought them to Texas. So
love it.
Pretty amazing.
Love it. It is amazing.
So speaking of symposium, should we introduce our next guest?
Yeah. So when I had this kind of little nugget of idea, like maybe we could ask maybe she would come on, which thank you so much for doing this. I was like, I have last year, you guys had a special Bourbon Women pick of Uncle Nearest.
That's right.
And I picked it up and I just haven't broken it open. And I don't know why. Every time I went to do it, Peggy, I was just like, I don't know. It doesn't feel right. And now I'm like, it's because of this moment.
It's because of this moment.
I love it. You were saving it.
That's right. And I don't usually save things. So that's just.
That's what's so funny. When anybody comes to my house, they expect me to have just tons and tons of whiskey on the shelves. commemorative bottles, etc. And I do have a few cherished bottles, but you know what we do in Kentucky with them? We drink them.
Yeah.
We don't save them. We drink them.
Yes, I have a feeling that this is probably not long for the world.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
But yeah, so we reached out, and we are so fortunate to have Victoria Butler join us tonight from Uncle Nearest. So we'll bring her on. Hi, Victoria.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
No, thank you for having me. I'm honored to be with you guys tonight.
Yes.
Well, yeah, likewise.
Yeah.
You're the ones who are honored,
Absolutely.
honestly, to have you on.
Yeah.
And we know we know a bit of your story because of the symposium and what you learned about Uncle Nearest as a brand.
Right.
And I've learned a little bit about you just reading up over the past few months. But would you tell us your story and how you got to Uncle Nearest and what the history behind that distillery is?
Well, I am Nearest Green's great-great-granddaughter, the man whom we honor with the Nearest Green Distillery. Nearest Green is the man who taught Jack Daniel how to distill. He was a slave, born in Maryland, and then later came to Tennessee. And my grandmother is his granddaughter.
That is unreal.
Oh, I got chills.
Yeah.
That's so amazing. So how did you come to be involved with Uncle Nearest and decide to take a role on?
Well, I was about to retire from working with the federal government for almost 31 years. And of course, I knew Fawn Weaver, our wonderful CEO, the brainchild behind all of what we do. I knew Fawn. Of course, she came to Tennessee about 4 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, I knew her from my family. When she came to Tennessee, she met all of my family. So I was about to retire, and Fawn and I talked about my role, what I could do at the distillery, and you don't say no to Fawn Weaver. Right, Peggy?
You do not say no.
And I'm so very grateful that I didn't.
Yeah.
This has been the best year of my life, with the exception of giving birth to my son. This has been absolutely, right up there. Not very many people have the opportunity to carry out their family's legacy, especially one that went untold for more than 160 years.
Wow.
So I went from a federal government job now to making whiskey, and I'm thrilled about it.
See, that in and of itself sounds like a Cinderella story of getting to have your ultimate job after working in a different job.
Yeah.
But then to add into it your family history.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds amazing. It sounds storybook.
Yeah, it's almost unbelievable, huh?
It really is.
It is. I have teased the team about becoming a crybaby. I mean, I worked in the field with law enforcement officers, every day. And we don't cry, But now when I think about, the story and what my grandmother shared with me when I was a girl.
Yes. And
now being able to walk in the footsteps of my grandfather all these years later, it's a blessing. It is a blessing. And I always want to make sure whenever I do an interview, a podcast, whatever I'm doing, I always want to tip my hat and acknowledge Fawn Weaver. Because if it had not been for Fawn and her determination, her drive, and her passion, none of this would happen. None of this would be alive today. So I'm grateful to her and to Keith for what they have done and what we are continuing to do. We have a fantastic team at the Uncle Nearest Distillery. We've put together a wonderful team of professional people who love the story almost as much as I do. You would think that they are bloodline descendants as well. So I'm grateful to work alongside some really, really fantastic people in the whiskey industry.
That's fantastic. So Peggy, can you tell us a little bit about this pick and how you guys chose it?
Well, we had a choice of 3 different barrels that were narrowed down, and we actually tasted it with a woman by the name of Sherry Moore, who, believe it or not, I worked with years and years and years ago at Jack Daniel. And then she came over to Uncle Nearest, just like Victoria did. So to be able to, first of all, rekindle with her was very special. And Susan Reigler, who at the time was our past president. So, you know, Susan, of course, has an amazing palate. You know, we do so much together with whiskey tastings. And so we narrowed it down to the barrel of our choice. And then Fawn made the final decision, you know, based on the tasting notes that we came up with. So this particular product, we were so charmed by this deep brown sugar note. Do you get that? Really deep brown sugar note with just this wrap of caramel and but soft vanilla, vanilla. And it just had just the right amount of baking spices and pepper notes for us. And of course, we have found out through Bourbon Women that Bourbon Women like their whiskey robust and high proof. And a little bit spicy, and that is
it. Oh, this is good.
That is proven. So we just enjoyed the heck out of it. And then we were fortunate that Fawn actually was our keynote speaker last year at the Symposium conference, where this bottle was our commemorative bottle.
Oh, wow.
And it just all just flowed together and just was an amazing experience. And, you know, I'm just so proud to have worked with Victoria as well in other capacities. So it's been fun to get to know the team.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's that, like you're saying, that vanilla, almost like a vanilla pudding with a brulee top or something like that.
Just real warm custardy type vanilla.
But then spicier on the palate than you would ever expect.
Right.
Yeah.
I love that. So Victoria, how did you get into the blending, the tasting? Is it something you've always been interested in because it's in the family, or is this a newer thing for you?
No, I haven't always been interested in the blending. I've always enjoyed a good dram of whiskey.
Yes, amen to that.
But Fawn decided that we would do a small batch, and that the descendant would be the curator of that. And so I had the esteemed privilege of being the first descendant to go into the lab and curate our 1884. Between the second and third batch that I curated, I came to believe what I was being told by the team, especially Fawn. And then we have won double gold and several other medals with the whiskey, that I realized that it truly is in my blood. So I am proud to curate this 1884. It is our small batch, and it bears my name on the back.
Woo-wee.
So I'm extremely proud of that. And between the second and third batch is when Fawn elevated me to master blender.
Nice.
So I am the first African-American female master blender. And that is beyond special to me, because my great-great-grandfather, Nearest Green, is the first African-American master distiller.
Wow.
And
I have to interject. Why do I not have a signed bottle from you?
When I come to your house for dinner, that is the gift I'm bringing.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. I got you, Peggy.
Well, Brad Hall says that's an amazing tradition in history. Thank you. And there's a lot of comments of people saying such a fantastic story. It's, Josh Galladay is one of our Texas Whiskey Life guys here. He knows about storytelling. Peggy, you talk about storytelling a lot too, and you talk about telling a story through distillery experiences, and it's a narrow path to walk down between, you know, marketing to somebody and telling a story that they want to hear. Yeah. With such a great story like Victoria's and like what you did last year at Symposium, could you talk a little bit about your philosophy on that?
Yeah, I mean, my personal philosophy, and believe me, I've worked on over 30 distilleries at this point, all about consumer experiences. And, you know, I think it's very important to get what I like to call the brand essence, you know, to know what your brand stands for, what it's about, what your values are. But more importantly, what we forget a lot of times is maybe what the consumer wants. You know, we always look at our brand from our perspective and, you know, what we want to convey, but it's really up to the consumer to love you enough and your brand to come back again and again, and to make it interactive, to make it emotional, you know, to make it engaging. And so sometimes we just need to watch our consumer play. And I really encourage people who own distilleries, who build distilleries, to sit and watch your consumer in action, tasting your product. What do they say about it? How do they react to it? What do they know right now about it that's true, that maybe they've heard? And how do we educate them even further? Again, to fall into kind of the romance of your brand.
Yeah.
I love that.
Daniel Whittington, runs Crowded Barrel, part of the Whiskey Tribe. One of the things he teaches in his classes is it's important to do that line between, you don't want to manipulate, but you want to educate, right?
Correct.
Like if you educate and persuade somebody, that's one thing. If you manipulate, that's another.
That's
and
right.
One thing I love, Victoria, about your story is that it's so honest and true, and that there's an amazing story. I think I was watching all the videos, and the videos are absolutely astonishing just to go through the whole story of Nearest Green. But you also have to have a really damn good product.
Yeah.
You know, so would you talk a little bit about, like, it's not all marketing. There's substance to what you're doing.
It is not. While the story is real and true, we have a damn good whiskey.
Yeah.
I agree.
The 1884, it's a 7-year blend. It is a 93 proof. Very, very smooth Tennessee whiskey. Of course, you know, I'm a little partial, but the accolades that we've received, I don't think they lie.
Yeah.
It is the sweetest of our 3 expressions.
Okay.
Well, it's not sweet. It is the sweetest of the 3.
Okay.
And the 1884, what that symbolizes, what 1884 symbolizes, is the year that we believe that Nearest Green last put whiskey in a barrel.
Okay.
So we honor him with 1884 on our label.
And for those who may not know, which in this audience who's at least live right now, they probably all know, but just in case, could you define Tennessee whiskey in the Lincoln County process so that everybody kind of understands what that is and how it got transferred to Jack Daniel?
Absolutely. The Tennessee process, or the Lincoln County process, excuse me, it is the filtration through charcoal mellowing. And that is what my great-great-grandfather, Nearest Green, brought to Tennessee whiskey.
Wow.
That is the process that every Tennessee whiskey has to go through to be called a Tennessee whiskey. We believe that it came over from Africa, that the people in Africa filtered their water through the charcoal mellowing. And so Nearest, in his infinite wisdom, thought to do the same with whiskey. And it was a brilliant idea. And that's what he brought to Jack Daniel Distillery. And that's what he taught to Jack. And again, that's what every Tennessee whiskey has to go through, is the charcoal mellowing process. The reason why it's called Lincoln County, because at the time where Nearest was distilling whiskey, it was in Lincoln County.
Okay.
When they rezoned, it was then Moore County. The house on the bottle of all of our whiskey, that is where Near's first, and the only place that Near's distilled whiskey. That is at the Dan Call Farm in Moore County in Lynchburg, Tennessee. We own this property, and it is where the first Old Number 7 of Jack Daniels was.
Unreal.
You know, we've talked a lot over the last couple of weeks about how Texas, we are just still very much a baby.
Yeah.
Right. And as far as Texas whiskey is concerned and what we're learning, and we're still figuring out, or not we, but our distillers who are doing the hard work, figuring out what kind of whiskey Texas is going to make. And just hearing the story kind of just, it gives me chills from just how incredible it is. And what your family has done and contributed to this field, but then also like what is to come from Texas whiskey. It's exciting.
You're a guardian. You're a guardian of an entire category of whiskey in Tennessee.
It's pretty phenomenal. Now, granted, I've only been doing this a year, guys. It has been a whirlwind of a ride. It's been fabulous. Yeah. But just to think, last March is when I came aboard.
Wow.
Unreal.
And in the last 12 months, not only have I had the good fortune of being the first curator of our 1884, but I have been elevated to master blender of a phenomenal brand. Yeah. So when you say you're a baby, I'm still a baby. So the good thing about the whiskey industry is, as all of us know, we are we're very good at sharing knowledge.
Yes.
That's why we're here tonight.
Yeah, I was about to say.
So I have met, so many wonderful people, Peggy Noe Stevens included, who have offered me a lot of knowledge and wisdom. My team members, others out in the whiskey industry. So it hasn't taken me a long time to get to where I am because of other people. So I don't want to, take credit solely because I've had a lot of help.
Yeah.
I do believe and accept now where I am that whiskey truly is in my blood. What we have done at Uncle Nearest is unheard of.
Yeah.
So I think that it was in me, and thanks to Fawn Weaver, that passion is being shared with other people now.
Yeah. Well, Victoria, I've decided sitting here that you need to come to Symposium in August. And you need to bring a bottle of the 1884 for Peggy and bring a bottle for me.
Okay.
And we'll have dinner and it'll be great fun.
Yes. Well,
but that's actually, I wanted to highlight that's one of the greatest things about my experience at Bourbon Women is.
I heard all about it. I didn't get to go.
I didn't let him go last year. I said, I want to go by myself. You can go next year. Yeah. So he's going to get to come this year. But
it was hot in Texas in August. I just got to bake.
It's always hot in Texas.
Oh, he's telling me.
I think it's 90 today or 89.
But Peggy, you have fostered a environment where I was just floored to see the collaboration. Yes. The collaboration between Texas brands working together was something so amazing to see, but just as a collective, as the whole group. And I think it's so phenomenal. And I love what you've done with that and how you've encouraged that. So rather than a spirit of competition, a spirit of working together and helping each other grow. And I think that's so amazing. So
pretty good at that.
I think besides an industry, we're a community.
Yeah.
And I really use that word very carefully because, Bourbon Women, for example, at the Symposium, you're going to see mothers who bring their daughters that just turned 21 as almost a rite of passage. You see aunts bringing their nieces. Then you see different states like Texas. You all came in force last year and ended up collaborating with people from Chicago and Indianapolis. And, girls meet up every year to symposium over the last 7 years. And they came by themselves to symposium, met all these women. Now they see each other every year. Yeah. So what we do, and it almost was organic, was foster community. This community of women that it's so engaging and they enjoy each other. And that's why I always say Bourbon Women, and you probably heard it in the opening, it's not a drinking club, it's a movement.
Yeah.
Well, one thing I do want to say is one of the reasons, in addition to just being an amazing collection of people that you are, is that we wanted to pay tribute to Kentucky and Tennessee, because look, Texas history has a long, long history, just politically and otherwise, to Kentucky and Tennessee.
Oh, yeah.
Right. I mean, Davy Crockett, Tennessee. Right. I mean, you have a series of Texas revolutionaries who came from Kentucky, and a lot of that knowledge came to Texas. And then after Prohibition was just lost. Yeah. And it took almost 100 years, basically 90 years, for the whiskey tradition to re-enter the state of Texas. And it's important, I think, for everybody who watches the Texas whiskey activities that we do on the trail and everything, to realize that there's a through line that goes there that may not have always been clear, but it's Victoria, it's there with you, Peggy, it's there with you. It kind of exists all the way throughout. And then there's a Scotch whiskey tradition, and there's a bunch of different whiskey traditions. We didn't want to make it the Texas Bourbon Trail because there's so many different types of whiskey. Right. And it is a unique environment here, but we want to thank you, Victoria. Thank you so much for being here. We do need to bring in our other guests here in just a second. we could talk. We could do a whole hour just talking with you, and maybe we will someday. Yeah. But Victoria, would you mind if we kind of like put you backstage for a second so that people can ask questions?
Thank you again.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you so much, Victoria. It's so lovely to meet you.
We'll be back with you. Okay. So Peggy, we want to talk Kentucky for a second, because Bourbon Women, Kentucky Bourbon Trail, Kentucky Distillers Association, all the work that you guys have done there. And we have another couple of amazing women to add to the stream. Yeah. So would you like to introduce them?
Yes. So we have both Susan Reigler and Maggie Kimberl joining us tonight. Hi, ladies.
Hello.
And
hi, everybody.
Susan, you were former president of Bourbon Women, amongst many other things that you do. You're a bourbon writer, and Maggie, you are as well. So thank you so much for being on.
Maggie, you are the content editor at American Whiskey Magazine, correct?
I am the content editor at American Whiskey Magazine, yes, and I have the great honor and privilege to have Peggy and Susan on the team with me. They do the tastings and they write a bunch of other content for us, and they are just fantastic.
We all work for Maggie.
We do.
Not even a little.
And Susan, how long have you? I mean, you're all in the Louisville area generally, correct? Right. How long have you been in whiskey as professional or otherwise?
I have been writing about bourbon for more than 25 years, before bourbon was cool again. And I actually. You will not believe this, but when I was the restaurant critic and beverage writer for the Louisville Courier-Journal, which I did for 15 years, I had to write a column to tell Louisville bartenders how to make an old-fashioned cocktail.
No,
I don't believe that.
One in town.
And can I add to that story, because there's the Paul Harvey rest of the story of that. Our colleague Michael Veach also credits her for kind of kick-starting and jump-starting the impetus for the Louisville Urban Bourbon Trail, because if I recall the story correctly, Susan, you had written about the best whiskey bar being Delilah's in Chicago. And, we all just kind of went, oh, no, not Chicago. They can't have better whiskey bars than we do. And so, Susan's kind of the one who jump-started that whole movement, too.
Wow.
Oh God, I got another one on her.
Let's hear it.
When I worked at Woodford in the early 2000s, I was trying back then to get women engaged, and Susan was the writer for the Courier-Journal newspaper, food critic, and I had invited her to an event called Women's Bourbon, Cigar, and Shopping Night. And that was my feeble attempt to have a little gathering of women to see how it would work with whiskey. And Susan proudly came. What's that?
It was formal. It was black tie.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
It was more formal wear, and Lincoln Henderson was in a tux.
Yeah. And
wow.
Henderson was there, who, of course, is an icon in our industry. But she was even helping me back then. And now I pulled her to become president of Bourbon Women years later.
That's so great.
I had the longest cigar ash, by the way.
You won the contest.
I did.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah. Well, Susan hosted a dinner last year during at Bourbon Women, which I was fortunate to attend. It was so lovely. You have such a lovely home, and got to hear Joanna play some piano. You both are accomplished musicians. That was amazing.
Yep.
And no, but it was selfishly, again, like I feel like so much of it like just felt like it was tailor made to me. But Heather Green was staying with you, My Lemon Green. I hadn't had a chance to get to know Heather really well yet. So I was
still
really
relatively new to Texas in general. So.
And Marlene was there as well. So that was just a wonderful night. So thank you for doing that and continuing to share your knowledge and your collection and your home. And
so if you don't mind, there's a little bit of politics that I'd love to talk about with you guys, if you don't mind for a second, because something pretty monumental just happened in the state of Kentucky.
Oh, yeah.
You guys just passed a law that looks like it was bolstered because of the COVID-19 outbreak that allows distilleries to direct ship to consumers from the distillery.
It did happen before the outbreak. It was kind of a groundswell of people coming to Kentucky saying, why can't we buy bourbon here and have it shipped to our homes like we go to California and buy wine and have it shipped to our home?
Right.
So there was a lot of pressure there.
And that was generally around like the clubs where you could go into the distillery and have it shipped to you after you've been there physically. But now it's opened up completely, correct?
Well, go ahead, Susan.
I believe that is correct. Yes.
Yeah.
So what kind of a impact do you think that's going to make to the distilleries? Because this is a pretty big deal. It's happening in a couple other states. It's happening in Virginia, New York, Washington State, at least temporarily, where they're allowing distilleries to distribute directly to the consumer in limited quantities or otherwise. But what we've noticed on the Texas Whiskey Trail is kind of bridging the gap between the people who make the whiskey and the people who consume the whiskey.
Right.
And are you guys seeing that too? And how are the distilleries in Kentucky feeling about that? And I'll start with you, Susan.
Well, I think it's such early days. I feel like I cannot speak to that. I really think that you'd have to talk more to the people at the distilleries to see what they're seeing with that. I know that it also is a little bit controversial because I think the retailers who would love to be able to ship to people, to their customers, have somebody, call up from whatever state and say, call up from Texas and say, well, would you please ship me some Bookers when you get it in? And a retailer cannot do that. So I think that's been a little dicey. And, I really honestly wouldn't want to get in the middle of it.
It's a tough one. Maggie, what are you hearing?
If I find out that there's a limited edition of something at the distillery, I'm lucky. I just hop in my car and drive down there and buy it.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's obviously not possible for everybody.
Yeah.
That's right.
Right.
Maggie, what are you hearing?
I've been actually hearing from the store side of things. I've been talking to the people who are on the front sales lines of this. And, there's a lot of apprehension about, is this going to impact our business? Are people still going to come see us? Because we have a lot of liquor stores here in Louisville that are destinations in their own right. We have tour buses pull up at liquor stores in Kentucky, and everybody pours out of the tour bus and goes and buys their bottles and schleps them back home. Yeah. And so I think there's a genuine fear that maybe that won't happen anymore. Now, I think that, with there being a limit of how much you can actually take on an airplane, because obviously this is people who are going on airplanes who are most impacted by this, because I think it's a limit of 5 liters or something like that. So it works out to maybe 6 or 7 bottles, I think.
Okay.
And so when you have that, but that's per suitcase. So, obviously if you just want to bring 10 suitcases and pay for it, you could probably get away with that. But for most people, putting a few bottles into their baggage is, enough. But for some people, they make a pilgrimage here and they want to take back as much as they possibly can. So I think this is probably something that's going to be better for that group of people, not necessarily taking away, hopefully, from the stores on the front lines, because really and truly, we do have some magnificent liquor stores that have a really specialty bourbon selection in them.
As we here in Texas as well. So it's a very good point. Peggy, do you mind talking a little bit, like in broad strokes, about bridging that gap between the consumers, and because that is a lot of what you focus on is bridging that gap between the people who make it and the people who want to consume it, and building that relationship between them, and what this may do for that.
Yeah, I think what you're going to see is more loyalty programs, more clubs, if you will, just like wine clubs have come on so strong. And what it is we have to kind of respect the 3-tier system, but we also have to take a reality check on the tourist as well. So, there are those occasions that a tourist will go to a distillery and that's maybe 1 or 2 stops. They don't have time to go to a liquor store. So it's wonderful for them to find a product they fall in love with and have some shipped home. There's other occasions, as Maggie had said, that they want to go to a liquor store to get a variety of things. So I think there's a lot of that meat in the middle, and we have to define more, not just the overall consumer of alcohol, but there are several types of consumer tourists. The ones that have to go through the distilleries, the one that wants to go to the liquor store and load up on all different things. So in other words, there's enough for everyone, in my opinion.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I remember Hope and I when we were there at Symposium and we went to Peerless, and we asked one of the girls, we're like, how many bottles are we allowed to buy? And they're like, what? Yeah. It's like, no, like in Texas, we can only buy 2. And they're like, you can buy as many as you want. And we were like, oh, I can buy all the bottles.
I'll tell you, I've worked on a couple Texas distilleries, and the proof gallon limit blows my mind how that works. But it's interesting. And, even though this bill, which is known as HB, 415, it's very important, but we do have some restrictions. There's still a 90-day window that legislation is looking at the detail of things that have to be done and followed through. And, you're not allowed to ship, for example, to a dry county without being fined, which you might not know it's a dry county at the time.
Right.
So there's a lot of still little details, if you will, to work out still.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's interesting, especially as, because when you're sheltering in place and you can't go visit a distillery, and there's, especially in Texas right now, like you said, there's proof gallon limits on how much you can sell on site, proof gallon limits on how much you can sell off site, and then a limit per person for only in-person delivery on site for 2 bottles.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we have a lot of restrictions here, but we're, again, relatively new to this experience. So it's interesting to see established markets.
Well, I'll tell you what would be more interesting to me, and I think Susan and Maggie would have something to say with this too, is what happens after COVID, because there's been over 200% increase on online sales of spirits. Just since the 1st of March.
Yeah.
So that was a recent figure I heard. So I think online is here to stay.
Yeah.
I would personally agree. And Maggie, I'd love to hear your opinion on that, because what we are seeing is that, there is an increase in sales of alcohol, but it's not necessarily going to the craft distilleries. It's going to the brands that everybody knows. Right.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, like Peggy said, I think retail is definitely here to stay. But one of the really interesting things is that even just at the store level, going into the physical store, that's even up right now. So whiskey sales are up across the board, across the nation. And I think in the long run, when things kind of, whatever that looks like at some point in the future, when things kind of get back to normal or the new normal or whatever that's going to be, there's nothing quite like going into a store, picking something up, talking to someone, getting their expertise, And, I think that eventually that will phase back in to probably a shocking degree, because I think, one, we're not going to want to sit at home and order everything anymore if we don't have to at some point. And two, it's a nice experience to go into a liquor store where somebody really truly knows what they're talking about and can guide you and say, well, what, like we have tasting rooms in a lot of these liquor stores. So you go into a place like Westport Whiskey and Wine, and there's a tasting bar in the back, and they have, samples of their barrel picks that they've done. And you can go in and you can talk to these people who are super passionate about whiskey and who want to have a great conversation with you and make sure that you leave with a bottle that you're going to really enjoy. And, there's something to be said for that physical in-person shopping experience.
I agree. And I have to Renita Revis here, who is one of our most prolific trail members, trailblazers, technically. She says, I hear this amazing store picks in Kentucky. Would love to get some of them here.
So many. Yes, absolutely.
So I think we should drink some whiskey.
Yes, please.
Are you guys
I'm ready.
Yeah.
We asked you, Susan, to give us a couple of quintessential Kentucky bourbons that you wanted to kind of sample through. We also sent you
all three of you.
Well,
I'm going to taste some Texas whiskey.
You have some Texas whiskeys that you were able to obtain.
Yes, right.
And
we happen to have some here. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we
won't say how we got them.
No, we won't. And I have actually several Texas whiskeys.
I remember I spotted some of Susan's Texas bottles. I was creeping on your collection, Susan, when I was at dinner. I was like, oh, there's some Marcones.
Yeah. So what should we start with? Because we got Old Forester 1910. We obviously have Blanton's, Peerless, Booker's. Would you recommend one that we should start with and compare it to one of the ones that we sent you?
Oh, wow. I think, let's see. I'm going to put my glaring glasses back on again so I can read this label. Yeah. How about we have the Iron Reed Harbinger here?
Ooh, Bourbon of the Year.
Yes. How about that? And it's quite high proof. What do we have here? We have a 115, 57.5
ABV.
Yeah. So.
Oh, look what Maggie's
It's beautiful.
We want to start with that, right? Yeah. Oh, did we give it a good rating? Good.
And I'm pretty sure we have all of the licorices in here in the comments. So.
Oh, okay.
I saw Marcia for sure.
Yeah.
Yes, saw Marcia. Hi, Marcia.
Yeah. I have my Texas Whiskey Trail glass here. I'm going to use.
Nice.
Yes. Fantastic.
Okay.
So if
I put Marcia's whiskey in my Bourbon Women glass.
Yeah. Okay.
Nice.
Very good. Okay. So now
a lot of comments about Harbinger being awesome in the comments. So
yeah. So remember, you don't stick your nose right down in the glass.
Oh, like I just did. Okay.
No. You want to just sort of you have to approach it sort of stealthily, like you're sneaking up on it. Sort of wave it, kind of blow away that initial alcohol. And then try again, and all those nice aromatics start to come out. Okay?
Yeah. Oh, it smells so good.
Oh, yeah.
So are you guys okay talking about the world's best bourbon coming from Kentucky or coming from Texas and not Kentucky?
I'm
opportunity drinker
with it.
Yeah.
I judged the World Whiskies Awards, so I judged that competition.
Oh.
And I can tell you there was no funny business.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is done blind. And, they make a really nice product. I've been talking to them for several years now because of all the different heirloom varietals of corn that they're using. And I mean, obviously it's turned into something really special.
Yeah.
In fact, I think I saw on Instagram, Marcia, I think it was Instagram, was trying a new heirloom corn. She was planting a new varietal.
Yeah, I think there was some gem corn in there.
Yeah.
They got the Bloody Butcher. They got the Blue Topaz. There's a whole bunch of different varietals of corn in this.
We talked about brown sugar earlier, and there's a ton of brown sugar in this.
Yes, it's really nice.
Oh, yeah, and a lot of those baking spices. What's the
I tell you, I get that toasted marshmallow.
Oh, yeah.
What was your question there, Susan?
No, the fruit. I'm working on the fruit. In fact, what I'm going to do is put a few drops of water in it.
Yep.
Gonna try to release some of that fruit that I think is trapped in the high proof.
I was racking my brain to try to think of a Kentucky bourbon to compare it to, and every time I kept doing it, I kept going back to I don't know that I can, because they're different things.
Well, they are different things, and that's the other deal here. I think there are a lot of whiskey makers who said to themselves very, very early on, they said, we're not Jimmy Russell. We know that these guys have known how to make bourbon for decades, and they make a certain style of bourbon that's a distinctly Kentucky bourbon style. They're different within the state, but there's hundreds of years of tradition. But we can make really good whiskey with what we have, what we grow in our state, with our corn, with our climate, and it's going to be ours. And so I'm not sure that I really ever think about comparing Kentucky bourbons to Texas bourbons to Washington State bourbons.
Yeah.
I just think, is this a really good bourbon?
Yeah.
And it's going to be different. It's going to be on its own terms wherever it comes from. And that's a lot of the fun of it too. What's better, this Bordeaux or this Burgundy? We're talking about wonderful French wines. Why not wonderful American bourbons from whatever region of the United States they come?
Yeah.
If I were to give any kind of comparison, because I'm in full agreement with Susan, every culture has its own indigenous ingredients, indigenous flavors, heat, climate, all of these things affect it.
Mm-hmm.
But what is reminiscent of a Kentucky bourbon for this would be Four Roses single barrel with their baking spices.
Oh yeah,
that to me would be the closest.
Yeah,
bourbon.
Which was what I was actually going to bring up, as a matter of fact.
Well, if you have a question, and one of you all, I think this is a great question, especially. I know this is something I've wondered kind of early on, like what does baking spices describe? Because I hear that a lot, but it's always, like, I'm like, well, cinnamon and cloves smell like two different things. So what kind of do you mean by that when you say that?
It could be a mix. Think about something like you get a really good cinnamon roll in the bakery, and it's not just cinnamon. There's a little nutmeg in there. There might be a tiny little sprinkling of cloves if somebody's being adventurous. But baking spices tend toward the sweeter spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, tiniest bit of clove.
Think of a baked apple pie, and you put those ingredients like cinnamon and nutmeg and clove, but when they bake together, all of a sudden there's some harmony.
Gotcha. Okay. I'm tracking with you.
So I do have some Four Roses single barrel here.
Yeah, I had to buy. I could only find these little teeny tiny bottles, but they're so cute.
Aren't they good?
I know.
Well, I know. I live in Kentucky, so I have a big bottle here.
Yeah.
Well, like we said, sales are up significantly, so it's hard to find.
We have an embarrassment of riches.
Right.
There we go. Yeah, it is an embarrassment of riches.
And I have to say, we attended the Houston Whiskey Social, which is a huge event that happens once a year in Houston. And the Four Roses not tent, but their table booth.
Yep.
They had a line all night long.
Yep.
Super long. So I'm glad to be getting to try it.
And Susan, I totally get the spice aspect of it.
Yeah, and this is only 100 proof, so it's going to be the spices are going to come to the fore much more readily. You won't have to add any water to this.
Yeah. Oh yeah, I get that way more than I do initially.
But then Harbinger has that, like, I think like Josh and Ashley were saying, this maple drenched pancake.
Oh
kind of note to it as well. But then the spice underneath it.
Yeah.
Oh, this is gonna be fun.
Now, Sarah, I know you're trying to learn how to nose and taste, etc. And so, because this is 100 proof, what we like to teach people when they taste is, to take a sip, and if it's really powerful in your mouth, after you swallow, just blow out.
Oh, okay.
Try that.
Okay, I'm gonna try that.
And it literally will blow out the alcohol vapor.
So.
Oh, that's so much better. Oh, was like, that's one of the best tips I've heard. But sometimes, you take a sip and you're like, oh man, this is going to
That's what we're here for. That's what
Yeah, we do taste, but we also exhale a lot. When we do it. That's the key. Lots of exhaling.
I love it.
It's like bourbon yoga.
You just started a business, I think.
There you go.
That sounds
I'm
like
here
a plan.
for it.
Oh man, if I could work out by drinking bourbon, that would be
awesome.
amazing.
So Maggie, when you were blind on this, when you were judging on some of these things, I'm assuming there was no age statements, no ABVs, or were there age statements?
No, they don't tell us anything. All they tell us is the category. So what happens is, it's judged at Bill Thomas's bar in Washington, D.C.
Yep.
And we go in 9 o'clock in the morning. We're judging from 9 o'clock in the morning till about 4 o'clock in the afternoon with a lunch break. So, I mean, it's hard work. We're doing notes, but you go in and it's just all these glasses lined up all the way down the bar as far as you can see. And the first round is poured, and there are judging teams. I think we had 5 or 6 judging teams this year. And, this team will get this category, this team will get this category, this team will get this category. And then, the next round, this team will get a different category, and so on and so forth. And so, I typically will judge things like American single malts or rye whiskeys. And then eventually I'll get a bourbon rotation in there. I got a lot more bourbon in the rotation this year, I think, because I think there are a lot more entries for that.
Right.
And so, you just go through and you're doing, 12 at a time per category, taking all your notes and everything, scoring everything. And then, once you go through that first round and all those counts are tallied up, then you go to round 2, and that's the end of the day. And it's, this bourbon versus this bourbon.
Yeah.
And you have to pick the winner. And so, it's a really amazing experience. It's totally blind. We have no idea what we're having other than category. We don't know how old it is. If we have a question, a couple of times I have wondered if something was miscategorized. And I said, can you double check on this and make sure it's in the right category? And they'll, go through their notes and confirm, yes, that's what it is. That's the category it belongs in. But other than that, we really don't know anything when we're doing the judging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Jamie Beal of Treaty Oak Distilling says bourbon yoga, yay. And this may be my favorite.
Here for it.
Josh says dramaste.
Yeah.
Good job, Josh. That was a good one.
Well, since we just heard from Jamie, I feel like maybe that's the next Texas whiskey we should try.
And let's do a quick on-air producing here. Are all of you ladies okay with going a little bit longer than the hour? Because we're at about the hour right now. Are you okay?
Oh, yeah.
Well, we have bourbon here. We're good.
Okay, Victoria. Victoria, I know you're backstage. Are you okay with just give me a thumbs up if you're good? Fantastic.
Great. Thank you.
So if you do have questions for Victoria or anybody, please bring them on. We just don't want there to be too many talking heads on the screen at the same time. But let's go through Treaty Oak Ghost Hill. This is a special edition because you can tell by the little bit of the wax top on there, but this is their aged underground because, as you know, the Texas heat is so blistering that they decided to experiment with something and age they did their bourbon above ground and below ground for 2 years, and then they did a harvest day where they dug them up, and it is a bourbon. But I'm interested to see what you think about it.
Okay.
So the funny thing is here, I was at Treaty Oak, I think last summer. I actually have my Treaty Oak shirt on under this.
Nice.
And they told me that was going to be called the Coffin Series. So when I read that, I was like, I liked that other name better, but I can see why they called it the Harvest Series, not the Coffin Series.
I was telling them they should call it the Resurrection Bourbon. So let me pour us some here. And this is definitely one that was shocking and amazing to me. And by the way, this is 2 years underground, and it's at 106 proof. Texas likes their cask strength or anything over 100 proof a lot.
Yeah,
you got the right group here.
Yeah.
Oh, this is so different than what we were tasting.
Isn't
my
it?
goodness. It's
Wow.
interesting.
So different.
I'm curious, Susan, and I do, of course, our whiskey tastings for American Whiskey Magazine. Susan, I'm dying to know if you and I are going to be on the same page on this one.
Well, let's see.
You got visual aids. I like it, Maggie.
I know.
I came prepared.
Yeah.
You did.
I get a lot more. I get a lot more grain out of this.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
I mean, it's almost malty in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not grain in a bad way.
Pudding.
It's just that's its character.
Yeah, and too, I mean, grain, it's very grain forward. That's the first thing I got. But then if you really get behind the grain, it's almost like a deep, dark raisin, almost port.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm getting a vision of the California raisins here.
Behind the grain, yeah.
Like that was what was shocking to me, because if you had given me this blind, I probably would have thought that this was a malt. And I probably would have thought that it did have some kind of a wine cask influence, but it doesn't.
I know it has a very almost
it's like the dark sun-dried fruit.
yeah, exactly.
That's a good description. Yeah, this is totally different than it's been a while since I've had it, and it's very different than my memory of it.
Yep.
I was expecting it to smell very similar to the Four Roses. That's kind of like what I had in my memory, but this is completely different.
And as Jamie says, it's yellow dent number 1. Corn is the primary grain.
Okay.
So it is.
Just
So nothing exotic here.
just a little herbaceous, kind of a little bit of sage, maybe.
Yeah.
And a little bit of that upholstery, like leathery.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We should have had them on like every night of this thing. They're so good. Rather than me just like randomly guessing.
And it is such a smooth, like everybody gripes about the word smooth, but it is a very smooth palate finish.
Yeah. Is there a tiny little hint of licorice in here?
Yeah.
I think so, yeah.
I think that's where I was getting that herbal note.
Right.
I think that's where I was getting that, but I was kind of getting that sagey, but maybe you're right, a little more on the licorice side.
Yeah, and it's just a little bit. It doesn't hit you in the face. It's not a Sazerac cocktail or anything,
No.
Yeah, I was actually going to say sage, actually, Peggy. That was actually what I was going to say.
I can see that.
Kind of that dry sage, which kind of makes you wonder if you're getting actual like soil notes, literally soil notes.
Being buried.
Yeah, you're one step away from a tobacco note.
Yeah.
On this.
And Lindsay, also Treaty Oak, says it's a weeded bourbon too. So
interesting.
It is.
I didn't realize that.
Well, maybe that's some of there's some sweetness that comes across.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I can see that.
It's very interesting to see what is possible in Texas in 2 years, but underground, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And for example, the Harbinger, which you tried, which is currently world's best bourbon, was 27 months. Right.
Yes, it's interesting.
And that is a thing down here is how quickly things will tend to age and how quickly you have to, how much you have to monitor,
Your climate is unbelievable. Quickly. And this being, what did you say, 2 years?
A little more than 2.
This is a 2 year straight.
3 months.
Yeah, it for the finish to me has a really strong nutty finish.
Mm-hmm. And
I can't wait to see what the Texas whiskey industry looks like in 5 to 10 years, because I think really the things that people are trying with aging are going to be really interesting a short time down the road, because right now it's still a little bit on the new side. The whiskey industry there, I think there's only been Texas whiskey for like 10 years maybe. Yeah. And, I think people are still learning, but, to their great credit, they're taking those lessons and they are, trying new things and, really just building a wealth of knowledge, for this industry to grow on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, that's something that we keep preaching all the time. And obviously, if you look closely on a lot of these bottles, you'll see the certified Texas whiskey seal, which is actually the seal that we created as an industry to show that you don't have to start with Texas grain, right? You can have any grain that you start with, but you have to start with grain. and then you have to mash, ferment, distill, mature, and bottle in the state of Texas.
Yeah.
Because as Jamie says, we have Texas terroir, right?
You should protect that.
There is something to that, and it is very clear when you see something. There's nothing wrong, of course, with sourcing from other places. I mean, Heather Green does a great job of taking a couple different Tennessee whiskeys, blending it with their Texas whiskey, and making a sourced product that's transparent about where it's coming from. But Maggie, would you talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind, about like transparency in whiskey and letting consumers know what they're getting?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's something, I would say most people would want to be transparent. There are always going to be those bad actors who are, trying to get away with something. And we've seen some lawsuits over that over the years. But I think the vast majority of people want that transparency because they realize that that's what the consumers want. They want to know what they're getting. They want to have the information. There's always been, kind of like a background trade in whiskey as a commodity, especially like the Kentucky bourbon industry. People would sell barrels, buy barrels, and all that kind of stuff. And it was just never really seen as kind of a big deal. It really only became a big deal when the craft whiskey boom started and people were sourcing whiskey. And there were those, maybe kind of like, this is my grandpappy's recipe kind of stories coming out. And then people were like, but wait a minute, like you just started this company last year. How do you have a 10-year-old whiskey that your grandpappy sourced? Like that doesn't make sense. So I think, the consumers are getting better informed now, and nobody likes to be lied to. People want as much information as you can give them. And for some people, like if they say, hey, this is not our whiskey, we have this contract, they don't want to say, that they're selling us whiskey. If you just say that much, most people are fine with that. You just have to give as much information as you can. And, I'm starting to see bottles with like phone books of information written on the label. And I love it. And I'm just like, who is reading all this? But I mean, awesome. Good for them for putting it on there.
Yeah. Susan is.
Yes, I am.
She's reading every word.
And a lot of our trailblazers are reading it.
I'll sort of turn my camera to the other wall here.
Oh, wow. Look at that.
Yeah. So, yeah.
That is a whiskey writer's room right there.
Yeah. That's fantastic.
So let's do one more Texas whiskey, and then we'll bring Victoria back in. We'll do some questions. We picked all of these whiskeys because they all have a heavy influence of female.
That's right.
Operators, distillers, or otherwise blenders. Yeah. So we did Harbinger. Obviously, Marshall Licorice is part of that team,
and Ashley.
And Ashley's part of that team, and they're an amazing team there. We had Jamie Beal and Lindsay in the comments at Treaty Oak, and they're amazing team there. And we also have Still Austin, and they have a series of people who work together.
Yeah.
I mean, Joanna Solis is one of the founders, and Nancy Fraley is actually the blender on some of these.
We love Nancy Fraley.
Yeah, Nancy sipped bourbon on my veranda too. So
and Nancy also, I think, works at
oh my gosh,
Iron Root.
Yeah.
And this is actually batch one. So this was actually batch one, and it's only a 12-month-old bourbon.
Huh.
Something hit me right away on this one.
It's the fruit.
It's a fruit.
It's the fruit.
Can I get
They did a sherry cask finish of this bourbon that I really wanted you to receive, but it's not available anymore. So we stuck to something that.
And we kept our bottle. Sorry.
You're selfish. Sherry
Yeah, because it just samples just teleported there.
Yeah, exactly.
Magically appeared.
Yeah, they did.
The fruit is changing. I'm getting a different fruit than my initial nosing fruit.
What did you get initially?
Initially, I got strong banana.
I totally got banana. And there was a blast of banana.
Yep.
First nose.
But on the palate, it's very jammy, which I think is nice.
Yeah, and I started to get the fruit on the nose started to change into a darker fruit.
Yeah.
Oh man, I like when I first tried this, I was shocked at what was possible in 12 months.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely get some chocolate notes. on the taste.
100%. And you know, another thing that they do, and this is seems to be a process in Texas, is the élevage process that, you know, is basically proofing down in the barrel over the months leading up to release to get more wood sugar out of it, because Texas can pull so much astringency out of the barrel that if you're élevage and adding water to it over time, that you can get more of those wood sugars. And
still does that. Iron Root does that a lot.
A lot of people are experimenting with different size barrels, different.
Do many distillers in Kentucky do the élevage at all?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I don't have a big percentage. No.
Okay.
Because they got time.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like they're dealing with the same kind of weather constraints.
We have very extreme temperatures, really hot in the summer, really cold.
Yeah.
You know, we have enough. It's perfect for cycling.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I don't want to call it a problem because it's just what it is down here. But I think what you have down here is the cycles happen in 3-day periods. Right. It'll be like 90. It'll be a 50-degree drop in one day, back up to 90, back down to the 40s. You know, and you'll have that in a very short period of time, and then you have this sustained period of 100-degree days right in the middle of the summer. So it's like cook, and then cycle throughout the fall and winter months. And that creates a weird cycle. It isn't
absolutely the antithesis, of course, of what you get in Scotland.
Yes,
you know, completely turned on its head. So in Scotland, of course, where it's kind of like 40, 50 degrees all the time and damp, and they can age their whiskey for decades. And in Texas, obviously, you can do something quite interesting and complex in a year or two. You know, it's
that's really nice.
Fascinating.
Isn't that interesting?
And then Kentucky's in the middle. So
yeah.
It makes it worth surviving all those mood swings, as I like to call them. If you get yourself all ready to be hot and then it's cold again. In fact, like last week, it dipped down to the 40s or something after being in like the 80, 90s. And
it was 96 and then it went down to 42 the next morning.
And I was taking my temperature like every 2 hours until I just realized I'm just cold.
Yeah, you don't have to. She thought she got the COVID.
They couldn't now, but it's wild.
Well, again, thank you to the distillers in Texas who allowed us to taste their products tonight. But
cheers to them.
Yes.
I think we should finish on a Kentucky bourbon in honor of these amazing women. So, Susan, Peggy, why don't you guys pick what we should do?
Kind of got a variety back here.
We have Peerless Bourbon, Peerless Rye, got Blanton's obviously, and then we have Forester and Booker's.
Oh my gosh, you've got several of my favorites, Frank.
Oh, good.
Well, you know what? I was the one who recommended you got the Old Forester 1910, didn't you?
Yes. Well, and Susan, I've got to tell you, when I went into so I did, the order ahead of time, but you had to go in to pick it up. And I was looking for the Four Roses stuff. So I was looking all around. I came back. I was like, no, I've got my order I need to pick up. And they brought the bag to me and I was like, I better look. And I pulled it out and sure enough, it was not Old Forester 1910. It was another one. I can't remember which one it was. I was like, this is not the right thing. I was the only woman in there. And they were like, oh yeah. Okay. Yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. So I had a proud moment of like, okay, I know what I'm doing in here.
So let's go ahead and go with that. We got Old Forester 1910.
Okay. I don't think Maggie and Peggy got the heads up on this, so they may not have that on hand.
Well, I'm sure you can find it quickly.
I can go to my closet. I can go to my kitchen right now and get those stuff.
And while we're doing that, I would like to bring Victoria back here in a second. So Victoria, if you get a chance, come back and we'll add you to the comments. But let's kind of end with in the last 15 minutes here or so.
I'm getting bananas off of this so strongly.
Well,
this actually smells very similar to me as the still.
Oh, I'm getting pecan.
For the Old Forester?
And all Old Forester whiskeys, you can always tell them that's their fingerprint, is the banana is the fruit.
See,
Okay.
I can see that, like,
Yeah.
or like a banana bread with
Yeah.
nuts in it or something.
Yeah.
And they're in different degrees, and it just depends. It could be the original Old Forester, it can be the signature,
Yeah.
but it's almost always there.
Victoria, thank you for coming back and joining us again.
Yeah.
Victoria?
I don't know if you probably didn't get the Old Forester memo or anything that was on an email directly back with Susan, but we're finishing on Old Forester tonight in honor of the Kentucky women who joined us tonight.
Yes.
And, you know, I don't even have to have a glass of Old Forester in front of me because I practically grew up on it.
You knew it.
So I always get a beautiful layer of caramel mixed with that banana, for
Yeah.
sure.
And then
Oh, yeah.
You're getting the same note
Okay.
they got.
and the interesting thing about this bourbon, and where you're probably getting the pecan, Spencer, is this is put in a second barrel for aging. A second barrel that has been charred so deeply that it would fall apart were it not for the iron bands.
Wow.
Wow.
So you're going to get a little bit of smoke,
Yep.
and you're going to get some milk chocolate coming out of that.
Well, and I kind of I was about to say that.
Along with the
Actually,
other
because
Old
what this reminds me of is your Kentucky Derby pie that you and your grandmother make.
Aha.
Good one. Good
With
one.
all of those deep chocolate chips and that brulee layer of pecan on the top.
Oh, that's a great description of this bourbon. Yeah. Love
Which,
that.
Peggy,
Tom
if I
Foreman
can
might steal that.
If I can make a little plug for Symposium, if you can get them to make those derby balls again.
Oh, sure.
Oh, those were so good. I had no idea what they were. And then I ate them and it was like,
It's
I'm never leaving. I
Yeah.
just think
It was
you're
hard eatables. Hard eatables.
heaven.
Oh, yeah.
Screw keto.
Right.
Yeah, they're brilliant.
Victoria, do you have a Kentucky bourbon that you kind of pin as your quintessential Kentucky bourbon?
Well, before I started drinking Uncle Nearest, Maker's Mark was my go-to bourbon.
Okay.
I still enjoy a good Maker's Mark 46 or a Private Select. I've always liked Maker's Mark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Yes.
The Old Forester birthday bourbon.
Yeah.
Delicious.
It's a good one.
Yes.
And I like Weller's is Elijah Craig. I like that.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, that's a good one.
So if you guys were, Victoria, how much Texas whiskey have you had?
None.
Okay. Well, we're going to have to remedy that in your near future.
Please do.
Yes.
We will be sending you a membership and an opportunity to come down and see us after
That
some
sounds
sampling.
wonderful. That sounds wonderful.
But we would love to have you down for sure. For folks in the comments, if you have any more questions, please add them into the comments before we get done here tonight. But there are some
hard ones. We got this. Ask them.
Yeah, no kidding.
I missed some ones up earlier that was asking about. Well, first of all, I think it's worth showing this. Jamie says that the mash bill on the Ghost Hill Treaty Oak was 57 corn, 37 soft red winter wheat, and 11% barley. Which I think is fascinating because to me it feels like almost like a malt. So that 11% is doing some heavy work.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. There were some questions about bourbon toasting, about like the toast and the char of the barrel. I actually have a question for you guys about age statements and 2 and 4 years straight. Those are very much Kentucky benchmarks, right? Texas, we have to deal with different time frames of aging and things like that. What would you say to people who kind of just say that age, it's all about age, and using that as a marketing metric? What would you tell somebody who's new to whiskey about understanding and appreciating a whiskey for what it is? And I'll start with Victoria.
Well, like our 1884 is 7 years old,
right?
Whereas the 56 is 11. So I think again that could be a matter of preference.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Not necessarily a necessity. It goes to your palate again. Of course, Peggy, she may differ from that, but just in my experience, I think it really goes to personal preference and palate again.
Yeah, Maggie, what were you about to say?
I have a lot to say about this topic. So first and foremost, people ask me all the time, what's the best bourbon? What's your favorite bourbon? I truly appreciate the craftsmanship that goes into every whiskey that I try. Even if I don't like it as much as I would like something else, I love and appreciate the passion that goes into this industry, the craftsmanship that goes into every barrel of whiskey, because that's somebody's passion that you're drinking. This isn't just, this isn't, we just whipped up a new batch of Kool-Aid. This is something that people put their blood, sweat, and tears into. They had a vision for this. They had hopes and dreams for this. And that's what I taste when I try a dram of whiskey, even if it's something that's been in the barrel for 6 months and they pull some out and they're just, try this, tell me what you think. That's where it was when I met the folks from Iron Root. They came to the New Orleans Bourbon Festival 4 years ago, and they said, here, I want you to try this. And he pulls out a flask out of his pocket. And I was like, okay, yeah, I like your style. Let's do this. And so they've become really good friends since then. I love the passion and I love the hard work that goes into this industry. And even if it's not my favorite whiskey that I've ever tried, I still love and appreciate it.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, you got a lot of comments. Bingo, Maggie, right there. There are some comments here. Jamie Beal, again, of Treaty Oak, says whiskey is a symphony, mash bill, age, climate, create a beautiful synergy, and unique like a fingerprint. I completely agree. Emma Kahn, Bourbon Women down here, says, such amazing women. Thank you guys for doing this. We're getting a lot of comments saying thank you for doing this. I just can't thank you enough. Yeah. Do you want to? Yeah.
On a personal,
what this means.
Yeah. On a personal note, and I'm going to tear up.
Oh my gosh, she's going to tear up.
That's what I do. You don't get to do that.
I knew we could be friends. Kentucky is like a home to me, even though I never lived there. Because you were there. You proposed to me on the farm on Christmas Day as a surprise, which is what I always wanted, but I didn't tell you, and you somehow knew. It was amazing. And I don't know our family farm. I think it's amazing that my grandmother's still there, and I don't know how long that's going to be. And this has opened a whole nother way for me to love Kentucky. Yeah. And love that part of the country. And
Kentucky loves you too.
So it's very personal, and I'm just honored that I get to be a part of this and that we get to do this. And thank you all for being on it. And bourbon makes you cry, y'all. Oh my goodness.
Look, y'all.
It's been such an honor being on here tonight with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you guys for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Victoria. Peggy, thank you. We hope to see you out here soon.
Yes.
We once this is all over.
I can't wait to come see you.
Yes.
Yes.
And all of you.
In Louisville in August.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. We will be there. And he gets to come too.
I get to come this time.
Yes, it's August 20th through the 23rd. Yeah. So we're still planning on it.
That's the god-awful hot time.
That's our symposium.
Yeah. Yes.
So symposium, August 20th through the 22nd.
Yep.
I will be there. She will be there. We'll get to go see the farm again. It took me 5 years of marriage to get her to let me go see Buffalo Trace, which is just down the road.
And we snuck away.
And we had to sneak away to do it.
We had to say we were going to Walmart.
But all of you are welcome. Yeah. As Jamie says, come on down. We would love to see you guys. You're all part of the trail now. You're all honorary trailblazers.
Yeah.
Oh, look, I got a card to prove it.
Yeah. I'm waiting on mine.
Cheers to you.
Yeah, come on, send me 3 of hers.
We will.
We will.
Okay, good.
All right. Cheers to y'all.
Yes,
we appreciate you so much.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Cheers.
You guys on the other side. Stick around for those of you. Stick around on the stream, but we're gonna end on a video here to kind of celebrate these women who are amazing and joined us for tonight.
And thank y'all for joining tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow night.
See you tomorrow night. We're still awesome.
Bye.
All right.
Bye. Thank you.
Bourbon Women is not a drinking club. It is a movement.
I wish my grandmother could see this. I do. I am Miss Green's great-great-granddaughter.
I'm in the magical room. Eventually this will hold all the bourbon bottles that are currently in production in Kentucky.
Absolutely nothing more compelling than watching someone chew on camera, is there?
Oh, yes, they are.
Yes, they are.